The Juneau World Affairs Council and Veterans for Peace Chapter 100, in collaboration with KTOO, present the 2025 Juneau World Affairs Forum, Unratified, the International Law of the Sea Treaties, and their potential for protecting Arctic resources and cultures. In this session, the national security implications of the treaties, a panel discussion including Paul Fuhs, expert panelist with the Arctic Council, Dr. Troy Bouffard, Director of the Arctic Security Program at University of Alaska Fairbanks, and Captain Steve White, Executive Director of the Marine Exchange of Alaska. Moderated by Board Member of the Juneau World Affairs Council, Philip Lawler.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and thanks to those of you who have joined us again from this afternoon. I see we have some bright and shiny, beautiful new faces, so thanks again for joining us. We have this evening a panel of three experts, as you heard. Steve White, he kicked off the conference this afternoon already, and the other two guys had plenty of time to engage. But what we thought we'd do this evening to talk about national security in regards to the topic of the conference, the UNCLOS and the Laws of Seas Treaty with focus on the Arctic and indigenous peoples, is give each of these gentlemen time to say a few more remarks on their own. This afternoon we had a lineup of solo artists, and now we're kind of getting the band together for a sort of an intellectual jam session, we could call it. But we'll get it going and maybe touch on some of the points we already hit this afternoon that already engaged or hooked into national security. And after we go through, say, 5 to 7 minutes each, then we'll open the floor for questions and Q&A and discussion. So to help prime the pump, and we've really touched on this a lot already this afternoon, I did suggest to the gentlemen a couple framing questions, and really I'll repeat those for the audience if you want to think about what to ask. And the first is really kind of what we're talking about by national security. It's a broad term, it's bandied about a lot, and it came up many times, hundreds of times already in the past few hours. But for those of us with gray hair will remember when we were in school, it was a pretty clear answer, and pretty much the whole country had a consensus about what that meant, national security, and it had to deal with the grand strategy of the time and dealing with it with the Soviet Union. Nowadays, like many things in the country and the world, there's not that clear a consensus of what that is. It's clear that there's implications and there's threats and challenges to securities, but just how do you define what's a national interest, what's a vital national interest, and what's national security, not just so you get the Congress to pass a bill on it or get the funding, but what does it really mean in a consensus through all the sectors of society? So I've asked them from their various fields of expertise to talk about, for these topics, how does it really affect or challenge or become part of a national security dialogue? And then the second question is, since we're a World Affairs conference, and a group is take a different viewpoint, not just the United States national security, but what about others' viewpoint of national security? And gentlemen, as you already brought up today, and it's when we say nation, we're a nation state as the United States, we already started to talk a lot, and part of the conference is about the differences in perspective and viewpoint priorities, the viewpoint from Washington versus Alaska, Juneau, Fairbanks, out in the more rural areas. And then also the viewpoint from, say, Ottawa in Canada, the viewpoint from Moscow, and where do these things overlap and where do they clash? And then finally, I want to recognize and again thank the gentlemen here for your service. It turns out all of us were military veterans, Coast Guard, and we've also got other civic service, academia, teaching our youth and our nation, civic service, Army. And so thank you again for your service. Thank you again for being here tonight. And again, giving up a bit of sunshine, rare as it is here, to share your wisdom with us. So with that, let's, Troy, let me turn it over to you, and if you'll kick us off.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So I'm Troy Bouffard from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Been there about 21 years. U.S. Army brought me here. And this national security topic always excites me. I built the entire Arctic security program at UAF based on an understanding of the framework that is national security. It's just not a phrase. It's not a buzzword or two. it's important to understand that it took a long time to get the Arctic added to the added to the national security as a priority. That happened in October 22. That changed everything about how the Arctic was for us and Alaska in terms of importance. And it started to help us form a whole of government approach and thinking. And what does that mean? National security is kind of how I think about things in terms of why does it matter? How do we make it connect to things that are priorities? Thinking about how the daily burden of managing national security is basically managed by foreign affairs authorities and defense authorities, and then all of the additional support that might be needed. But that's the daily grind of it for every nation, okay? And for UNCLOS, I've never seen an international global instrument that more combines the balance of foreign affairs, the State Department, and Department of Defense, sharing a lot of those responsibilities. A lot of times it's just the foreign affairs authorities leading, and Department of Defense in a clear supporting role. This is a lot more balanced. So for UNCLOS, I'm gonna bring up some of those things that are directly tied to those national security interests, now in writing even. So freedom of navigation is something we've talked about quite a lot. We don't recognize Russia's control over the entire surface waters of the Northern Sea Route all the way out to the EEZ. That's their regulatory control right now. That's the amount of control they demand on nations who want to use those surface waters. That's more control over surface waters that should be open to international transit and maritime activity than every other disputed area in the world combined. Right? It's too much of an impact on freedom of navigation, and it's based off of UNCLOS Article 234, which has merit. They have a case. We are facing this situation on how to deal with that, and it has very important national security implications in terms of what can our forces expect in terms of using those waters. Do we have to abide by that? If and when it's an issue, how could it be an issue? If it becomes customary law, will it apply to the rest of the world? These are very tough questions we're dealing with right now. Critical minerals, we've talked a lot about that today, which is good. We need to. As we try to figure out what it means to Alaska, some of the work I was able to do in the Senate, I learned how this sort of applies globally. In the Department of Energy, U.S. Geological Survey has led the way in terms of how to understand critical minerals in terms of national security interests. What is critical about critical minerals? How is it defined? That's a flexible definition. Unlike rare earth minerals, that's fixed. Those don't change. There's 17 of them, 16 are natural. Critical minerals are dependent on being critical, meeting that status, on a definition that's flexible based on their importance for different reasons. Right? And there's a lot of that at play. There's a lot of that at play at global levels, at national levels, and in turn, we're trying to figure out what does it mean for Alaska also, right? So it's a very fluid discussion. Those critical minerals that are on land, those critical minerals on the seabed, it's a relatively new discussion, but it's becoming part of where so much competition is converging. And now we find ourselves talking about it in terms of UNCLOS, which is supposed to help manage the seabed mining aspect of it. This afternoon we covered it very well. And the one I think is the strongest is international institutions. What can UNCLOS do when it comes to international institutions? And this is where I think we see some of the bigger changes happening in the world right now. Post-World War II order, as we know, the global order, is no longer the same. 80, 90 years of that, it's changing. You know, we did not let China into a lot of these important institutions. They had enough of it. They went their own way, and they created parallels and equal institutions to compete with the West. And they have been extremely successful. All right, we have a problem there. The world order as we knew it is gone. All right, we are in significant competition with China. who is growing their global partnerships around the world to the point where it's a problem for us. Okay? And we talk about UNCLOS and what could it do? Why would we join it? Well, the way the world worked when the US led and was so powerful and influential in the world order of before means maybe we should be supporting these institutions where the West was so successful. Us abandoning them or not fully supporting them just leaves it open to exploitation by China. They are making astonishing progress at replacing the West in terms of influence around the world. The Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank is the rival to the World Bank. I am extremely successful. They have an enormous amount of partnerships with other nations and investments in the billions. That's going toe-to-toe with Western nations and other institutions growing just as fast, right? So the world order, the way it used to be, it's changing. And this could be one of the stronger things I think that Congress could get behind. We talked a little bit with Ms. Dana Herndon earlier. Congress is very unified. The nation is unified against China. This is an opening. And if we can convince them that China is a threat in this way and others, maybe there's a different way to argue. Like, we really need to support our international institutions and bring the West back to the power it had. Recreating a new world order is not going to help us. Letting China continue the way it has been, not going to help us. Not sure what left we have, but I'll stop there. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll leave that there.
So before I get into the specifics of UNCLOS and the International Seabed Authority, I just want to say overall, regarding some of the remarks, yeah, it is a new world. And what it came of is the failure of a post-Soviet, when the Russia melted down, the failure of Europe to really design a new pan-Arctic security structure that people could live in peace. Russia was no threat to them. They were on their knees. I was there at the time, nothing was happening. But the old hatreds of Europe for thousands of years, back and forth at each other, have lost all trust, destroyed all diplomacy. 100 years wars, 80 years wars, 80 years ago, Nazi Germany trying to take over the whole, continent, right, just 80 years ago, which was personal to me because my dad was in the Battle of the Bulge. And through all of this, Russia would much rather have been with the Western institutions and even proposed that. So what we did by pushing Ukraine to NATO and by pushing Russia to China, we've created this. And who couldn't have seen that coming is pretty interesting. But, and in the end, the 100 Years' War, I don't know if you know, so it finally ended when they gave Joan of Arc, France gave her to England, they burned her at the stake. That was good enough for them. So that's what we're living with in Europe. And every time they get so screwed up, we have to go in and try to save them. World War I, World War II, now Ukraine. So that's my overall view of it. Now we get into the International Seabed Authority. The critical national security interest there is really China in control of rare earth minerals. And they recently announced that they're restricting those rare earth minerals to the rest of the earth. So we ought to care about this and you look at the Law of the Sea Treaty and see how we can be part of setting the rules for this. So the Chinese have applied for and received 92,000 square miles of seabed for opening through the International Seabed Authority. And one thing that our previous speaker didn't bring up is so now to this country that has gone together with this metals company, well, under the rules of the International Seabed Authority, they haven't proposed the rules, as we heard, right? Environmental rules, whatever. What happens when a member nation declares that they're going to go ahead and do it anyway, the clock starts ticking in 2 years. And if they haven't put those rules out in 2 years, it goes out completely unregulated. And that speaker might have been fine with thinking, well, it's the Wild West and I can go out there and just make my claims as long as I'm not interfering with anybody else. But what happens if they try to go over the top of the Chinese, or the Chinese try to go over the top of us? They are so far ahead of us on this, and although we resent it, and it's put us in kind of a compromised position where we're dependent on them, is how can you really blame them? They saw this coming. They've been working throughout Africa, through South America, everywhere, in order to go ahead and arrange these arrangements to get these critical earth minerals. They saw the world decarbonization effort before we ever did. Now the difference was China hasn't been in a war for 40 years. They put all their money into their economy and building their infrastructure, transportation, getting rare earth minerals. What did we do? We had a war against mining in this country, where we're trying to shut it all down. So, you know, which created a problem, but we created it, okay? And, you know, when you get down to it, to make an electric car, it takes about 6 times as much metal as an internal combustion car. But the main one is copper, 193 pounds of copper for the drive for the wheels and everything. So when you mine copper, you get if you're lucky, you get about a 3% rate of return. That means for every electric car, we've got to mine 3 tons of copper ore, okay, for one car. Where's that going to come from? So this is what China is seeing in this international seabed. It's just their next step in it. They're way ahead of us technologically. If we can get in there and be part of it and help set the rules, we might be able to do something about it. But as of it right now, we haven't protected of our sovereignty. We've given it away. And I'll stop there.
Wow. China, man, sounds like they're taking over everything, and Europe ain't helping. We got to burn somebody at the stake. Geez. I'll just say I maybe have a little bit different view on this, and maybe more optimistic. And UNCLOS, great discussions about the value of it, some against it. You know, the reasons behind it, but that's a multilateral thing, and hopefully we get there, and it has got some merit, but it's not the end-all be-all. The U.S., through unilateral agreements, is still doing its job out there. China's not protecting the Straits of Hormuz. China's doing adversarial activities against others. They're not wearing a white hat out there, and I still believe that we as America are doing the white hat. Are we behind China? Yeah. Strategy-wise, they are worldwide, and they are going, and we are trying to counter that. But we're doing a lot, and we have done a lot. Just through our multilateral, I mean, when we're patrolling with the Coast Guard, when I was, we had a stack of bilaterals this way with countries all up and down Central America, South America. They're very complicated. What you can do in different people's zones that we all talked about and heard about today. But what we're doing is we're trying to do rule of law. And we are a country based on rule of law. And even with our partners Canada, where we have a disputed borders with them, both up in the Arctic and right here in southeast Alaska. They claim one area, we're claiming the same area. Well, we work together to say, hey, we'll enforce laws on our country and other countries, but not Canadians, and they'll do the same. These kind of cooperations are important. Even with Russia right now, which another Cold War, we have an agreement on where the boundary line is. We had a disagreement on where it was. We both claimed, but we said, hey, so we can enforce and we can do things, we'll agree on these coordinates. And we use that to do rule of law. We protect our fisheries using that. The Coast Guard's out there on that maritime boundary line doing it. So while UNCLOS is a next step and working toward that multilateral, we still have a lot of tools in the bag. It's not all gloom. And I think recognizing when you talk national security that we have things to do, that's important to recognize these gaps and start addressing them until we do get some other laws or other things on the book. But we need to look at national security not just from the adversarial side, but what do we need to do here in the U.S. To take care of that? And I think it's kind of a continuum. We've got to build up in this region we're talking about, Arctic. We've got to build up our capabilities up there where they're on par with the rest of America. We need to get the right sensors up there, the right communications, the right rules, whether they're laws or whether they're voluntary or whether they're best practices, and we're working on that. And there's a lot of room where we can continue to work, but it takes, I think Troy mentioned working together, working with the whole of government. It's also a whole of the people that are up in this region. Nobody else cares about this back east. I don't want to say they don't care, but they're not looking at this. This isn't what's eating their lunch every day, what kind of infrastructure is built out in Alaska. So we need to keep focused on what we can do, who our partners are, and where we can have effect. It's almost like the Serenity Prayer, in a way. What can I control, And we got to stay focused on that. We got to keep a strategy on what we can control. And there's things we can do today. We don't need to wait for a multilateral agreement that might come in a year, 2 years, 4 years, never. That's kind of my view on it.
Thanks, gentlemen. So I would, as the MC announced, if we have questions from the audience, please feel free to make your way to this mic here. While we're waiting for them, let me ask a question. I forgot to mention at the beginning that in addition to those two questions that you mentioned, what I wanted to get to, and Steve, you talked to it about a bunch in your presentation earlier, and you just mentioned again, is because a lot of the discussion about defining what is national security, and we talked about economic security, energy security, food security, freedom of navigation. And some people would say, well, national security is really about what's just existential, what really threatens the existence of our nation. And that's, there's a bit of a judgment call, there's all kinds of analyses here. Even if the Chinese already dominate the electrical vehicle market and batteries and the minerals, it is economic competition, it reduces our influence, but is it really a vital national interest in the national security thing? And there's an argument to be made either way. But in those sort of academic and policy and legal discussions, then, and I know as practitioners and operators who get to, Steve, what you're gonna ask, well, what can I do, right? What should I do? And what, if it's a national security threat, what is urgent that we do? And Steve, you talked earlier today, and some of you weren't here, but eloquently, and actually all the speakers built on this, but specific technical things to have access and be able to operate regardless of what the rules are in terms of safety and security, navigation, communications. You mentioned the icebreakers we talked about, as well as the infrastructure, the ports and bases, and then the framework, the legalities, rules, and the policies to be able to operate those things. Let me ask you, gentlemen, while we're waiting for the audience then, what would you specifically recommend in terms of tangible actions that could or should be taken in this context?
Presence. Got to have presence. The daily grind of difficulties in reality in the U.S. Arctic, in the Bering Sea, in Alaska, in sector Juneau and District Arctic is civil security issues, all the activity, and gray zone related threats. The Arctic is by definition a gray zone where hybrid threats thrive. And that's what we need to wrap our heads around. But for most practical purposes, especially for the Coast Guard, who's responsible, our primary operators in the Arctic, is to be able to be effective in response, be there, be present to deal with issues, de-escalate, save people, respond to disasters. That's the hard work. That's the real stuff happening on a daily basis that needs the most attention and resources, prevention, preparedness, and we're not always doing that. It's easy to get wrapped around North American missile defense And that pulls a lot of attention and resources because it's the ultimate threat from our adversaries, hypersonic cruise missiles and this whole next generation. But on a daily basis, these folks in the Coast Guard, just please give them stuff to do the job. If you had to guess how many search and rescue incidents there are in the United States from the Coast Guard's responsibility area, you had to guess a number per year. It's about 250,000. It's a lot, all right? And in Alaska, it's just 10 times harder at the very beginning. So, presence and capabilities is what we got to get.
So when I talk to military people, and I still have good contacts with the CIA and the intelligence agency, I said, well, you really expect, is Russia really a threat to us? Or do we ever expect a land where Russia's going to invade Alaska? Oh, no, that's never going to happen. I said, well, what are we doing? Well, I said, look, we've got, you put up the chart. Oh, look, they flew into our airspace, and we went out and saw them every time that gets a big report. But then there's a line that said, but we don't consider it any threat. And we're doing exactly the same thing on the other side, all right? So what is it really about? It's proxy wars, all right? If we can't fight each other, and we know we got at least 3 Russian systems that there's no defense against. That's Oreshkin, Zircon, which are hypersonic, and then this new Poseidon, which is a nuclear-powered huge torpedo that travels so slow you can't track it down. When it gets close to a coastal zone, it speeds up to 100 miles an hour and then detonates and creates a radioactive tidal wave over the whole city. You can't defense against that. So people that are kind of oh gosh, we don't need to worry about pushing Russia. There's no really risk of confrontation. It's just we're playing with fire. We really are. And that's why I really, respect the efforts here of the Veterans for Peace here in Juneau. We all need to think about that. What did we do? We spent, while the Russians were, or the Chinese were moving ahead to build their economy, we were spending trillions of dollars on wars that after we left, they hated us and we never got anything done, okay? What were we doing? What is our strategy of international affairs? China now is, moving forward with soft power, which we used to do with the U.S. Agency for International Development. Some of it was good work, some of it was pretty wasteful, the examples they brought out, but some of it was flat out. We spent $5 billion trying to convince Ukraine to go into NATO, which they knew at the same time. Our CIA director, Burns, said, you do that, you're going to create just like Cuba when Russia put Cuban missiles here. You're going to create a war. And they did, intentionally, okay? So it's proxy wars. And I was involved in the Vietnam War, which all of us in intelligence knew those people were no threat to us in any way. Now they're still completely communist, and they're our best ally in the region. So tell me about it. Where's the brain trust that's keeping track of the big picture here? What are we doing? So the main thing, I'm also working with the Northern Forum. Our position on all of this is that we ought to be saying, once Ukraine is settled, we're not going to get involved in that, but we ought to be able to restart our Arctic work. We ought to be able to restore the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, which has been shut down for Russia. We ought to be able to do permafrost research, safe shipping on the Northern Sea route, Article 234 of UNCLOS. All of these things, we need to get back to work. We weren't any cause of the war, we don't have any part of it, but we've been held hostage. And once it gets settled, we need to let go to where we can get back to the cooperation that we had. Remember some of the first trips that Bruce Patello and I took over there, this is when it was the Soviet Union, the friendship flights and everything like that. And we're back to that point again. And we need to be ready to rebuild after this thing is settled. And it will be one way or another. We just don't know how right now.
Yeah, I think understanding what motivates Russia, why they're operating in the Arctic, a lot of stuff Troy kind of talked to in the slides at the beginning, understanding China, why they're operating. I don't think their focus is to start a war or to have conflict, but we don't want it to turn to that. So understanding why they're doing it, and then we can see where our gaps are and we start filling the gaps, whether it be military capacity, defense capacity, but there's a lot to be done on the civilian and industry side too. We need to continue to build out capabilities for those rules of law, procedures, just even within our own waters and our own country where areas to be avoided, sea lanes, identifying risk to those things that hurt national security, you know, food security, preventing oil spills, saving people, some of those basic services. It's like, you know, we could talk about, hey, you could put an ambulance at every corner of every intersection so we can help people if somebody gets in a thing. Well, we can probably do some smarter things. We can put in some stoplights and some have some speed limits, and there's a lot of things that we can do that we've done all over the rest of you know, the Western civilization, and it's missing in the Arctic. So that's what we can do to start filling the gaps. And not start, we are doing that, and we got to keep focused on it. And the forums like this help keep us focused on it, on where we need to go.
All right, thanks very much, gentlemen. Dr. Baker, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks for giving us a broad picture of how we understand national security. I guess I'm still thinking about what difference does it make? Would we be more secure if we were to accede to the Law of the Sea Convention than we are now? And maybe some concrete examples about things that we can't do because we're not party. I mean, sort of beyond what we've talked about today. And I guess another piece that we haven't raised at all that to me is a huge part of national security is the freedom to conduct science. And what role, I mean, marine scientific research is its whole rabbit hole in the convention, so we don't really need to go there. But yeah, are we more secure or less secure by not being party? I guess is my shorter version of the question.
You want to take a stab?
Yeah. So I mentioned prior that UNCLOS is one of the most powerful instruments on the planet. It governs, what, 70% of the world. And it's absolutely imperative to understand that it is based on two powerful categories, one being international law and everything that comes along with that in the diplomatic world, and then operational law. How our forces interpret that for operational purposes is critical. And being a full party member to the instrument that governs most of the planet and being a champion of the rules-based order that we say that we are by being a full member is a way, you know, to at least achieve decent optics, but then have the full power of saying we're a party member, we're in the room now, we have a vote and we have a voice where we do not now, and can say and help to provide our interpretation of this is how we see operational law, this is how we see sea management, and who needs to do what, and who's part of NAVAIDS, and who's doing the right thing, who's doing the wrong thing. We can't do that right now. We're doing it from the sidelines. So just, you know, membership alone gives us at least that one part, and I'll hand it off to Paul for another part.
Yeah, I think we'd definitely be more secure. You know, I support it 100%. Although there do need to be look at some of this is what is the enforceability of some of the measures? And we've just seen some pretty, you know, dramatic, just ignoring some of the laws of the sea that are already agreed to. I mean, in the next panel, I'll probably go more into that, ghost ships and everything else. But Section 234 of ice-covered waters, where you can actually, as a participating state, go in and actually provide some regulations and monitoring the things that the Marine Exchange is doing. If we had that, we could say even in vessels that are of innocent passage, you know, Canadian, you know, tankers just off our shore that we have no, you know, regulatory authority over, or going into the Arctic could make a big difference. And this system has proved itself for the Marine Exchange. Okay, it's been there, 25 years now, a little bit more, almost 30. So in the meantime, these prevention measures that have been put into the Bering Sea over 25 or 30 years, can you imagine how many vessel groundings and oil spills and casualties we've had in 25 or 30 years? Anybody know out here, we're, 1.4 million square miles we're covering out there? How many casualties? How about 0? Okay? These measures need to be implemented on a broad-based basis. Section 234 can be part of that, but there's other ways that you can do that working through the IMO. Regarding science, I went to COP29, I went to the climate change conference in Baku here, and one of the sanctions we've got is that we don't allow the Russians to give climate data anymore. And so I talked to the modelers, we can't run our models, we don't have the Russian climate data. Well, do you think Vladimir Putin cares that he's not giving climate data? I mean, come on, we talk about diplomacy and world affairs. Isn't one of the measures of diplomacy that we said that it's actually effective, that it actually does something? What does that do? We can't do cooperative, the fish are moving further north. We can't do cooperative fisheries research, which is proposed, or cooperative management of our fisheries because of these sanctions. What does that have to do with anything? So again, we need to say, once this is settled, we know we're being held hostage now. Once it's settled, part of those provisions, we need to push for that we can go back and start doing this work that we need to do. We had nothing to do with the war in the first place.
Well, when we woke up today, we weren't signatory to UNCLOS. When we wake up tomorrow, I don't think we're going to be. And I think we're still, if you ask, are we more secure or less secure, we're the same. And we're still enforcing fisheries, not just in our EEZ, but we're doing it internationally. We're looking we're working with coalitions to address IUU and enforce laws
Tell them what
out there.
IUU is. Illegal fishing.
Illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. Thanks, Paul. We are addressing bad actors. The U.S. is really doing a lot to keep rule of law around the globe. Troy, he mentioned all our services. He worked with Air Force and Special Forces and got a great joint background of working with all forces. We're focused around the world to keep rule of law safe, and that's not going to change whether we're part of UNCLOS or not part of UNCLOS. So I think we're still safe. Are we the most effective? We can always be more effective, and I talked about that. We have gaps. Maybe that's one gap that we need to work on. Maybe getting the right resources is another gap. Maybe getting procedures, but we're focused on it. We're recognizing what the threats are, what you need to know what the threats are so you can do something. And to the science community, I know there's been a lot of big hits to that community as of late, and collaboration, just as it is in security, is important in science, we do better working together. So finding a coalition of the willing and finding where we can have effect is really the way to keep us secure so we can sleep at night and know that we are going to still be safe as we were yesterday as we are today. So.
Let me, if the audience is still thinking of a question, let me kind of pose one and sort of piggyback on Betsy's there. And Troy, you got me thinking, you mentioned sort of gray zone and hybrid warfare, which we hear a lot about, especially in Europe and maybe the Middle East these days. But more and more on the sort of law of seas, there's a term I hear often associated with China, and I don't really know, I've been out of academia for a while, if this is a doctrinal term of lawfare, where adversaries sort of navigate around and technologies like social media make it, and perception management make it maybe a new art form. So I don't know if it's actually taught this way now, but it does seem to, and I know we, with Dr. Baker and the panel coming up, is more legal centric, but it sort of dovetails in this international competition and conflict where things like treaties, and you mentioned how after World War II, and the United States as a preeminent world power sort of helped shape these international institutions, and to our advantage, and arguably, some people would say to the world's advantage, for better or worse, but for us, it was better. And so this, to Betsy's point, that argues that we should be at the table and help shaping this. But the counterpoint is maybe we are not the strongest in the room, economically or militarily or for whatever reason. We may be at the table, but not still have the same ability to shape things like we did coming out of that generation or two after World War II. And maybe my concern, hypothetically, is actors and governments and generations of students in perhaps China have learned to sort of leverage those frameworks more to their advantage. Do you have a sense on, and I use this term lawfare, I know it's sort of buzzed in the media, but I'm not actually sure if it's actually in doctrinal joint pubs yet or now. Is it?
Conventional warfare, irregular warfare is becoming doctrinal, and one thing about the Arctic to understand that it's emerging and becoming part of the globalized world means a lot of norms are being established in the Arctic region. Things for the first time are developing meaning and definitions. And that's what we used to do, even cooperating with Russia, is we all worked to define the Arctic in our own terms, right? That was the big race and fight. That was the only competition in a lot of ways, while we were cooperating in a lot of ways. But still, there is an enormous amount of norms and meanings being established right now, good, bad, or indifferent. What's acceptable, what's not, how are we gonna do business, how are we gonna assume risk, right? Everything up here is risky, so in understanding, as usual, sometimes the first question you got to ask is, what's the threat? And it's hard to define the threat. Like, I don't think Russia's going to invade Alaska. However, right, it's a scenario, extreme, but what's going to be the more likely scenarios? It's going to be the enemy trying to poke around, learn about our infrastructure, weaken us, and operate in the gray zone. Conducting hybrid warfare and testing our limits and checking out our infrastructure and seeing how they might be able to affect it later.
So we become so dependent on our phones and all this electronic and everything that makes it easy to make it a target. Jamming GPS, doing all these things. Actually, what I hear we're looking at it possibly going back to the old Loran system, which you can't jam, right? We thought, we're just going to go to satellites. Well, of course they're vulnerable, but in terms of, who is the strongest? We're the strongest militarily. We spend our defense budget is 10 times what Russia's is, 10 times. More than the next 10 nations of the world combined we're spending, okay? 748 military bases throughout the world, Of course, we're the strongest, but when it comes to somebody that's got nuclear weapons, how are you going to use it? But we do these proxy wars. We're going to do this electronic warfare, propaganda war. We're trying to weaponize the dollar and say that you can't use it. Well, that's a complete violation of Bretton Woods, where we said we'll make the dollar the standard and everybody can use it. It's going to be transparent. It's just going to be an accounting system. Well, now because of that, now we're looking at alternative world currencies and the devaluation of the dollar. So who couldn't have figured that out? Right? I mean, just I got to wonder, where's the brain trust that's actually looking out for our national interest in a larger sense? And I know we're being driven by media. What does it look like? I want to look like the tough guy, tougher than the next guy. And it's all optics. There's no real analysis going on. I talked to the guys that I know at the CIA, and they said, well, aren't you reporting this to them? Oh, yeah, we're reporting it to them. I said, well, but they're not listening to us. I said, who are they listening to? They're listening to the military defense contractors and the lobbyists and whoever's got a microphone in front of them on TV. That's who they're listening to. Okay? That's a fact. That's where we are. So anyway, that's just kind of my take on it from what I've seen. And I think in the next panel, I really want to get really more into this whole vessel safety, the trip that I just spent at the Geneva Center for Security Policy, but all related to safety of the Northern Sea Route and all that. It's kind of beyond this, but I've got a lot of detail on that of what's actually going on there.
Troy, to kind of answer your question, you know, China, I got asked this in an interview once with the Joint Chiefs. I said, China, friend or foe, you know, and well, we're not at war declared with them. Are they a friend? Are they a foe? I think we could, again, we could have a whole talk on China, and they are not a friend. And we talk about that continuum of cooperation, competition, and conflict. We're definitely strongly in competition with them and the rules they play by. We're talking about us playing by rules, and should we sign on and play by rules? They don't play by rules. They are doing anything they can to gain an advantage. And to go back, are we doing the right things, and is there things we can be different? I'm going to use we talked about Coast Guard a lot, but I'm going to use an analogy because that's my background. I was a sector commander for Southeast Alaska, about the size of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, same amount of area. If you were to go down there to those states and look at all the resources they have, Coast Guard, Marine patrols, civilian organizations like SEATO, there's a lot of Schlitz to address concerns up there. I got about 1/10 of the resources for the same area to do my Coast Guard mission as the Coast Guard has down there, plus they have all those other resources and partners. So it required up here us to make partnerships, us to work with the National Guard, with DOD, with the state of Alaska, with industry. Coast Guard doesn't do most of the search and rescue up here. Industry does. People are saving themselves. We're coordinating it. Oh, the closest boat is the fishing vessel Juliet. Can you please stop fishing and go help this person? The Coast Guard cutter's too far away right now. You're going to get there first and save some lives. That is the same answer. We don't have enough Schlitz, despite how much we spend. We're all over the world with what we spend. We need to continue to work with our partners too, and our partners mean everything from what's here within the nation to our those who want to work in that cooperation forum.
All right, great. So I see we have a question from the audience, sir.
Yeah, I'm KJ Metcalf. Security has a lot of different angles to it. Alaska is an Arctic state, and we have the right as a state to be part of the discussion. I mean, there's so much going on. This is a new world we're looking at. Salmon going into the Arctic Ocean because it's further north. There is no more north after that. So what does that tell us about the ecosystems and the production of food and the health of the environment? This is unimaginable what we might be facing. The predictive models for the Arctic are not very good because it's all new. It's never happened before in our lifetime. So as a state, we have to have our voice heard. So what would each of you tell the state leaders what they should be doing? Give them an elevator speech.
I'd say learn what the precautionary principle is and apply it in all your thinking.
See, the problem is Alaska has no standing within the Arctic organizations. We have no standing in the Arctic Council, and it's really because it's national. So we have no standing. Now, we do have some groups here, the ICC, the Aleut International, that have more standing than us as indigenous people. We have nothing. We got some ideas and we're doing it. We're heaving it over the side of the wall and hoping that something sticks. But we have no standing there. Alaska has no standing. Now, we need to take it, and we need, an administration of the state that's really paying attention to this. I just haven't seen it, from Alaska or even our legislature really seriously addressing these Arctic issues. So that, you're right, that really needs to happen. So, I want to say one more thing about China. Who is Alaska's #1 trade partner? How about China? $1.8 billion a year, okay? So let's keep a, look at the, economic side. Then I also heard in terms of competition, well, Russia's building all these bases across the top of the Arctic. Well, the nice thing, they're combining it, it's also oil spill response, emergency response. So it's kind of a multi-deal. So I've been working with ADAC here, and it looks like we've been trying to get it established as a reopening the base or a logistics center for the Indo-Pacific region. So, to the Russian guys, when I was there, I talked to the military, I said, would you see that as a provocation to you that we're, reopening the ADAC base? And they said, well, no, isn't that what coastal states do, protect their coast and everything like that? I said, we were just wondering what was taking you so long. That's from the Russians, okay? So, anyway, I'm not trying to be negative, and I think, the thing that Steve is doing at the Marine Exchange, absolutely, and we just want to amplify that by giving more authority so that more people that, if that they call it innocent passage, they're really not that innocent when it comes down to threat to Alaska. #1 threat to food security is a crude oil spill in the Bering Strait, which would slime the entire coast. Fish can sense toxic in the water, kind of swim away. Marine mammals have to come up through it. It'd be absolutely devastating. So, that's just some of in the next panel, I'll go into, some of the things that I've been doing, with the Arctic Council and others to try to address that issue of innocent passage. No. But the system's in place. This is not a research project. This is vessel tracking, monitoring, emergency response, real-time weather out to the ships, currents if they've got it, digital fencing, fiber optic cables and pipelines don't run over them. Marine Exchange does it all. We're ready to cooperate with anybody. That's the whole purpose, is marine safety. I mean, this guy's wearing the white hat more than anybody in the room right now. He's actually doing it. And we just want to expand that so it covers other people to protect our coast and protect our food security.
I guess my elevator speech for Alaska would be it's an amazing state full of amazing people who's done a lot for a long time. And there are challenges up here that probably the state's never faced, but there's never been a focus on Alaska like there is now. The Arctic is mentioned in almost every national strategy of every agency right now. There's a world focus on the Arctic. So my message for Alaska is take advantage of the opportunities. This is your turn where you're in the limelight, and find the partnerships, find the people to start helping make a difference. We have an opportunity up here in the state right now, whoever asked that question. That's what I would say to the state of Alaska is let's maximize this opportunity.
All right, thanks, Steve. So we have one more question from the audience. Corey.
Yeah, so as far as all of the research being conducted in the Arctic goes, and you saying they're not sharing that sort of weather data and everything with us, and you also mentioned that the worst thing would be an oil spill, and I do agree with that on the acute sense, but right now there's currently a reemergence of the Pacific warm patch, the blob, that killed off a lot of our fisheries and everything. And affected all of these marine animals as well. We saw a dip in humpback whale population for the first time in decades. The last time that peaked around 2016 or so. And if we're not sharing this data and being able to be prepared for that, I'm not really sure where we stand on this. So I'm just curious as to how these treaties would affect our sharing of data that goes beyond simply predicting the weather and preparing for storms, but to the entire change of our ecosystem, all of these things that are beneficial knowledge to the entire world. Because things don't just stay in the North Pacific either. Marine mammals can be a nutrient pump and supply all the nutrients for the equatorial latitudes and everything too. So it goes much further beyond that. I was wondering what the atmosphere around that collaboration would be, if there's a possibility of separating that from security issues or not.
Yeah, I'd like to, we do a lot of this. There's stovepipes within just our nation with sharing information. There's people doing great stuff. And where I said this is an opportunity for Alaska, I meant that. The University of Arizona is studying Alaska right now. There's people from all over that are focused up here, and leveraging that, all the different money and all the different resources that are doing stuff, and really kind of bring it together. Whether we aren't getting stuff from Russia, fine. We got a lot of Schlitz that's going on up here. Let's break these stovepipes down. Let's put it together. And there's a lot of people that are doing that and working to do that and trying to get this information. And it's not perfect. There are gaps, and we need more. I mean, I was just on a call 2 days ago where we're talking about food security in Alaska, and people aren't able to land in airports up in the Arctic because weather system down at FAA. But guess what? There's nonprofit organizations, there's other people that are going to start putting weather and starting to do some stuff. So we just need to leverage those opportunities and collaborate better to share that information. There's more of a focus now because there's more of a need on that.
So are the opportunities there in the more private sector instead of like governmental or like university?
I love the government. I worked for the government for 31 years. Most inefficient organization in the world. Public, private is a way to go. It's way more efficient. It's quicker. It's more reactive. You don't have government shutdowns. And it's really a partnership to make that work, but that's a way ahead that'd be more effective.
Yep. I'll tell you one trick to this, because I do this a lot, is to help demonstrate and change the minds of where people sit on an issue right now and show them how this new issue is more urgent. You have to shift that thinking politically, and you use everyone who can help you do that. That's how you affect change.
Amen.
And I think you had made the point too, you've got to at least keep collecting the data.
Yeah.
And when it gets around to where we can actually work back together again, then
together.
you haven't lost that.
Yep.
He made that point to me the other day. I thought that was really relevant.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much again for your expertise.
That was a panel discussion on the national security implications of the treaties. It was recorded October 10th, 2025 at KTOO on the unceded territories of the Occoquan on Tlingit-Ani as part of the 2025 Juneau World Affairs Forum, Unratified, the International Law of the Sea Treaties and their potential for protecting Arctic resources and cultures. Produced by the Juneau World Affairs Council and Veterans for Peace Chapter 100 in collaboration with KTOO. With support from Core Alaska Kensington Mine, Wastman & Associates, Ramada Inn,